Today you're going to find that this message is going to be one of the most challenging messages I think you've ever heard. Because, to be honest with you, I struggle with it. Not the accepting it, the putting in practice of the message. I pray this morning that those at home, and I want to touch back on Shane, on the announcements. The reason the 8:30 service is moving to 9 o'clock, because in 2.5 years, my biggest complaint has been about this service is we have to choose whether we can go to Sunday school or whether we come to contemporary worship. This is trying to fix. I've got my Apple Watch set. At 9:55, it's going to vibrate. Or at 9:50, it's going to vibrate. 8:50. 9:50. Y'all know what I mean. It's going to vibrate, and what that's going to mean is, Mark, hush, because we got to get to Sunday school. So that's what we're trying to do for years. For 2.5 years, that's really the biggest gripe I've heard, is I wish we could go to Sunday school. So I want to encourage you between now and the 1st of December, if that's something you want to do, whether you're watching online or whether you're in house, start checking out the Sunday schools. If there's one that your kids are interested in, the adults are interested in, couples, whatever, so that we may be able to grow together. This morning, so the message, Patsy and I have been talking, we have for years, but anyway, I think this is, and I think most of you agree, the most frustrating times of our life. You can't be around your friends because you don't know who's sick and who's not. You can't, everything it is just, some of you really liked the election, some of you really didn't like the election. Either way you went, there's a lot of people frustrated, a lot of people not. Our football season, who knows? Thanksgiving, can we get together with our extended family? Who knows? And if we do, we're going to be looking at those cousins, you know, the cousins you got, even worse now than we looked at them last year, because if anybody's got it, you know they got it. We can't come into the house and worship without looking at everybody. Back up, buddy. Hey, back up. I told Steve this morning, I said, back up. He said, I've already had it. I said, me too, but back up. And it's not a thing that we're fighting here in Gunnersville. It's a thing that they're fighting right now in Italy, in Germany, maybe not in China, but getting together is risking your lives. Because this is a global frustration. People in Germany are just as frustrated about all this mess as you are, as we are. And then they quarantine us in our house with our beautiful others. And boy, that's really went well, hadn't it? So anyway, so this morning I want you to hear the message, but if you've ever taken a message and worked it in your soul, I pray that you can work this message. This morning in 2 Kings, as God began to show me this, I seen that this is a truth that not only runs in the Old Testament, but it runs entirely throughout the Bible. And I want to set it up. The king of Syria is trying to destroy Israel. And every time the king of Syria makes a move, the Israelis know what he's fixing to do. And they avoid that area because they would be killed. And the king of Syria calls in, you read the chapter before this when you get home, the king of Syria calls in all his commanders and he said, so which one of y'all are not for destroying Israel? Because everything I do, they know I do it. So it's got to be one of you that's telling them. And the men, the chief guards looked at the king of Syria and said, Master, there's a man of God. And he said he knows the very thoughts that you think in your bedroom by yourself. Woo. He said it's him that's telling him. So the king of Syria said, we can take care of that. where is this man? And I don't remember. He said he was maybe down in Dothan. And so we pick up the scripture where the king of Syria sent his army to find Elisha. And he had a good idea of what he was going to do with Elisha. In the 6th chapter, 14th verse of 2 Kings, he said, therefore he sent horses and chariots and a great army after one man. And they came by night and surrounded the city. And when the servant of the man of God, notice he didn't say Elisha. He says Elisha a couple of times, but the writer makes an effort to show that this is not just Elisha, this is the man of God. So when the servant of the man of God arose early and went out, there was an army surrounding the city, horses and chariots. And his servant said to him, Alas, my master, what shall we do? Let me put that in Mark Mayo terms. Holy moly, have you looked out the window? We're going to die. So he answered, and I want you to listen to what the man of God said. He said, do not fear. How many times in the Bible do we read, do not fear? When Jesus come walking on the water to the disciples out in the boat, he said, fear not. He said, it's me. He said, do not fear. And then Elisha said one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. And it's not what the servant wanted to hear. He said, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Don't you know that the servant went, what? It's only us. It's just like 6 of us. And it's an army. And Elisha stuck. Settle down. There's more of us than there is them. Don't be afraid. I would be losing my mind. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may be able to see. And then the Lord opened the eyes of the young man and he saw. What did he see? And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. So when the Syrians came down to him, Elisha prayed to the Lord and said, strike this people, I pray, with blindness. And he struck them with blindness according to the word of Elisha. So you got the servant who gets up, looks out the window, done fix coffee and everything. And he looks out the window and he sees this great host of army. And the first thing comes to his mind is, we're going to die. The king of Syria is tired of it. We're going to die. And so he expects, and he runs back to Elisha, and he expects Elisha to do what Mark does a lot of times. Throw his hands up in the air and go, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And Elisha, a rock of a man of God, looks at him and he goes, don't worry about it. There's a lot more of us than there are of them. And so God, he said he prayed. He said, Lord, this young man is upset. He's scared. He knows he's going to die. Open his eyes and let him see what I'm seeing. Let him look through a different perspective. And so when the young man looked, he didn't see the army of Syria that was there to kill him. When he looked, he saw a mountainside of chariots and horses, and they were on fire. Elisha said, there's more of us than there ever was of them. And you think, well, that brings great comfort. But then when you look at what Elisha done, he didn't use the soldiers, the horses of fire, and the chariots. Elisha just walked out there and said, God, blind these. And God blinded them. If you go on and read a little bit further in the chapter, Elisha led these blind men over into another place. And the king of that place says, I'm going to kill every one of them. Elisha said, don't kill them. He said, feed them. And so they just sat down there in the middle of them and they ate. And Elisha said, God, open up this king's eyes that he might be able to see that these are just men. And so that king fed them instead of killing them. And as God began to deal with me about this message, looking from God's perspective, it completely, and this is what you're going to struggle with, it completely changed the way I see the world. It completely changed the way I see my life and the way that it is lived. We're going to run through a few scriptures this morning. I want you to know that when you change your perspective from Mark's perspective and change it to looking through somebody else's eyes. I remember back in grade school, and we'll get back to that. I remember back in grade school, the most popular dude, and he watches on Facebook, has for a while. He was our quarterback, kind of a short guy, ugly looking. That's just for you. But he got glasses. And when he got glasses, elementary school, man, I wanted glasses. Because he made glasses where yesterday they were 4 eyes. Ha ha, honey boo boo, you 4-eyed booger. And then today they're like, oh, I need some of those. And one day, I'll never forget it, he took his glasses off, and he took his glasses off, and I reached and grabbed them off of his desk, and I put them on my face. Couldn't see anything. And I put them back, and I got to noticing he kept pushing them up, pushing them up, pushing them up, and I thought, thank God I don't have glasses. Now I do. I wanted to look through his glasses because I figure if I look through his glasses, somehow I could become the cool kid. I could be the quarterback. I could be the one that the girls are chasing. Let's be honest. I could be the one, when you raise your hand, it's like, yes, Mark. And the teacher addresses you. But with him, it's like, yes, dear, how can I help you? I wanted to be that kid, and I just knew those glasses would change it. And when it comes to the Scripture, going back to the Bible, Elisha asked for God to change this young man's eyes to where he could see in the way Elisha was seeing, not as the servant of the man of God, but the man of God. And I got to looking, as God took me through this in the Spirit, not in the Word itself, but in the Spirit, I got to looking. It's the key to being a Christian. Y'all ready for this? If we look through God's eyes, giants become tiny. You know what I'm talking about? David and Goliath. The whole army of Israel were looking through their eyes, and they hid behind a rock. And David come walking up there, and he said he brought his stuff from his father to give to him. And David said, what's wrong with y'all? He said, God has delivered a lion into my hands. He's delivered a bear into my hands. He said, what is this uncircumcised Philistine? That's what's the big deal. And so David walks out there onto the battlefield, and the giant looks at him. Even to make it even bigger, the giant says, I will rip you apart and feed you to the fowls of the air. And David just told him what a great God he served. Let's go a little further. Daniel was locked in a room with a bunch of kittens. See, when we look at it through our eyes, it even sounds silly. He was locked in a room full of kittens. The Bible said, looking through man's eyes or human's eyes, he was locked in a room with a hungry den of lions. But when Daniel, looking through God's perspective, because what is God able to do? And when Daniel looked in there, he played with kittens all night, and they probably snuggled up against him and kept him warm. Because Daniel refused to see the armies out there because he knew greater was in him than greater was anything out there. So Daniel looked through his perspective, through God's perspective, and he played with kittens all night. I thought that when you go to the 3 Hebrew children that were still praying after it was ordered to pray, and the Bible said that they gave him one more chance just to kneel and worship the idol, but they said, we'll not worship the idol. He said, whether our God saves us or whether He doesn't, He said, we're going to serve the Lord. And so they heated up the furnace 7 times hotter than it had ever been, just to intimidate them a little bit more. The giant got a little bit taller. The furnace got a little bit hotter. But I want you to know they was not looking through their eyes. They were looking through the eyes of God. And they knew this. They knew that God would either join them in the fire or that they would join God in the place that God had promised them. So they changed their perspective. And the Bible said that they walked up into this furnace in man's eyes, human's eyes, but what they really walked up to was a few little candles strode out. And they walked out among those candles, and behold, the king even looked and said, did I not send 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? He said, but Lord, he said, I see 4. And the form of the 4th one is likened to the Son of God. Jesus hadn't been born in the flesh, but the king recognized him in the Old Testament. Because those 3 boys were looking through God's perspective and not their own. I thought if you go on over to the New Testament, we find Peter. Peter at one point, he asked Peter, he said, Peter, who do others say that I am? And they said, some say you're Elijah, some say you're Elijah, some say this, some say a prophet. And he asked Peter, he said, Peter, who do you say that I am? I want you to listen to this. And Peter said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus looked. Now, God's not talking to mankind. He's not talking to humanity. And Jesus looked at Peter and He said, flesh and blood hath not revealed this to you. Only my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. Peter was looking through God's eyes. But if you go on down in the rest of that chapter, we find Jesus said, I must be served up. I must give my life. And He said, on the 3rd day I'll raise. And Peter said, over my dead body. And Jesus looked at Peter and said, get thee behind me, Satan. The difference is, in this first of the chapter, he's looking through God's perspective and sees Jesus as the very Son of God, the very nature of God. But then Peter changes and he starts looking through Peter's eyes. So one minute he said, God has revealed this to you. The next minute he's telling Peter, get behind me, Satan. Because you see, when I look through my eyes, things scare me. And things scare me in a way. When a couple, 3 or 4 weeks ago, and y'all know I'm clear by 2 weeks. When I first got COVID, I said, God, if this is what's going to kill me, let me go out glorifying God. My flesh don't bother me. When I found out I had cancer, I was able to look out at that mountain full of, I don't care. If this is what kills me, then God, glory be to God, I'm ready to go. But sometimes when I look at the state of the church, I see the soldiers all the way around it. Sometimes when I look at my faith, I see the soldiers, not God's soldiers. I see the devil's soldiers. When I look sometimes at the way I conduct myself with fear of different this, different that, maybe the way people look at me or think about me, I have a hard time looking from God's perspective. See, I ought to look at me and I ought to think, you know, I'm God's chosen man of God. He's got me, this, that, and the other. But when somebody says something disparaging about me, instead of looking at the soldiers and through God's perspective, sometimes most time, just about all the time, I look through the army's perspective of, yeah, they're probably right. Am I by myself? Don't we look through God's perspective sometimes? And we look through our perspectives at other times. I thought this morning we can only be a triumphant church is if we take up our cross and follow Him. If you want to know what victory is, I'm trying to stay on stage. Notice I'm failing. If you want to know what victory is, we spend so much time trying to be Christ-like. Right? Here's the one place that I'm having to learn to be Christ-like. Is to do the will of God regardless. To look through His eyes and let Him work through my hands and my mouth and my body regardless, because the worst thing you can do to me is kill me, and if you kill me, on the third day I'm going to rise anyway. So Jesus was able, and He had a little bit of that. He was still flesh. He struggled there for just a little bit, praying that God's will would change, but I want you to know He ultimately said, "Thy will be done." So this morning, going back to where we started, do we believe that God's in control? Do we believe that God's just going to drop us off a cliff somewhere? Do we believe that the God of heaven that spoke through Elisha, that spoke through all these prophets, if we believe that that God is still alive and well, then we have to believe that greater is He that is in us than he that is in the world. We have to believe. In church, this ain't about our life. This ain't about living or dying or staying alive. It's about living. Jesus said, "My people are happy people. My people are loving people. My people are forgiving people. My people are full of joy, peace, long-suffering, meekness, kindness, gentleness." And you know what? Through all this frustration, I found myself full of anger, fear, hatred, envy, strife. See how quiet it is in this morning? If you've ever heard a message, not because I preached it, God preached it to you, listen to this. It's looking through the eye. I'm going to die. Y'all believe that? Whether it's out here on 431, Paul Harvey said between here and Untitled is the worst stretch in the United States. I'm going to die. I know I'm going to die. But it's how I live. It's how I live that matters to me. And I refuse to live in frustration. I refuse to live in anger. I refuse to live with a scowl on my face. I refuse to live that every time I go to the store, this may be it. I refuse to crank my truck and think, well, I'll probably get killed today. I refuse. Just because I can't worship the way I used to worship or the way I want you to worship, I refuse to live in bitterness. So this morning, I challenge you. Come on, guys. I challenge you to change your perspective into God's perspective. Put a smile on your face and know that whether I live or whether I die, I am the Lord's. I have been bought. I have been purchased. I have been acquired. And the God of heavens, the creator of heaven and earth, looks at me and says, "You are my son." I'm His son in life. I'm His son in death. I'm His son whether I wear a crown on my head. I'm His son if they nail me to a cross. And by George, I'm going to live looking through the eyes and the perspective of God. I pray, if that didn't make any sense to you, I pray that God will open your eyes. In church, it's our choice. And I'm not talking about whether the ones that online, I'm not saying just throw care to the wind and come to church and forget it. That ain't what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about walking out in front of a bus. I'm talking about not letting fear and not letting what I see through my eyes control me, but rather choosing to look through God's eyes. And I will follow the Lord. Shane. Oh, we're just right. Shane read you a scripture, and I haven't really referenced this, but let me reference it. Can you pull that back up, Marty? She's awesome. Y'all know it by heart, but if I start quoting it, I'll mess it up. David come to this conclusion. The Lord is my shepherd. What else do I want? What else do I want? Look, He makes me to lie down in green pastures. In other words, God is in control of me. There's times when God puts me over here, and then there's times that He leads me beside the still waters. One is laying down and one is walking. He restores my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness. Why? Because His name is on me. I tell my boys, don't you realize your name, my name is on you, and what you do affects me. He leads me in righteousness for His name's sake. David got it. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, though I'm frustrated, though my body fails me, though everything I touch crumbles, though death looms over my eyes all the time, he said, I just don't care. For you art with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table right smack dab in the middle of everybody that hates me, and I'm able to sit down and eat and enjoy myself because my focus is on you, not on the enemies around. He said, you anointeth my head, my cup. He's walking through the valley of the shadow of death. And David said, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So I question you this morning, whether you're live streaming or whether you're in house, from what perspective are you looking? Because if you change your perspective, you'll see a world that you've been praying to live in. Stand with us, those that are able this morning.